Self-handicapping was first defined in 1978 by Stephen Berglass and Edward Jones as any action or choice of performance setting that enhances the opportunity to externalize or excuse failure and to internalize, reasonably accept credit for success. When one self-handicaps, they put a barrier between themselves and success. This way, if one fails, they can blame it on the barrier or handicap for the failure, thus externalizing the failure and protecting one's self-esteem and public image. If one succeeds with this barrier, however, they will feel even better and prouder because they achieved success despite the barrier or handicap. It's really all about fearing failure. When your self-image and pride are on the line, it is more devastating to try hard and fail than to not prepare and have a handy excuse. It protects our self-esteem and our public image. I would have done well except this happened sounds a lot better than I tried my hardest but I just couldn't do it. One example of self-handicapping is going out and partying the night before a big test that you're really nervous about. This way, if you fail, you can blame it on a hangover or lack of sleep instead of your ability in the subject. Another example of self-handicapping is injuring yourself before an athletic event. I'm going to share a personal self-handicapping event that took place 2 years ago. I was entering into my first ski competition and I was very nervous and honestly quite scared of the venue. So at the top of the mountain, before my run, I decided to see how far I could slide down a hill on just my ski boots. I kept pushing it even though I kept falling hard. Eventually, I fell and I dislocated my right shoulder before my run. The ski patrol popped my shoulder back in and I decided to still do my run. When I didn't place in the finals, I blamed my dislocated shoulder for my slow and sloppy skiing. This was easier to swallow than the alternative that I was just not that good, and it kept my public image somewhat intact. At the time, however, I didn't realize what I was doing. It was a largely subconscious act. Here are some other examples from the textbook. Fearing failure, people will reduce their preparation for important individual athletic events. They may give their opponent an advantage. They may perform poorly at the beginning of a task in order to not create unreachable expectations. They also may not try as hard as they could during a tough ego-involving task. All of this, of course, in order to preserve self-esteem and public image. Perhaps the most famous study on self-handicapping was done by Stephen Berglass and Edward Jones in 1978 at Duke University. It was announced as an experiment with drugs and intellectual performance. One group of students is given very hard aptitude tests that may not even have answers. The students are required to put an answer. The participants in this group are told that they received very high scores, much to their surprise. The students are then offered a choice between a drug that will inhibit performance and one that will enhance performance on the next test. Thinking that they were very lucky with their first score, a majority of the students in this group chose the performance inhibiting drug. This provided a handy excuse for poor anticipated performance on the next test. The students in the other group are given easier questions, and the majority of them chose the performance enhancing drugs because they felt confident about their ability to solve the questions on the second test. Because the students in the first group were not confident in their ability to perform, they chose the action that led to a handy excuse so that they could externalize the bad results that they highly expected. This study shed a lot of light onto the idea that when people are uncertain of their future success or failure at a given task, they are likely to partake in actions that hamper their chances of success in order to be able to externalize the bad results that could possibly arise. It is just all around easier to give yourself a handy excuse for failure just in case than it is to face failure head on. I believe that most people do it subconsciously and probably way more often than one would guess. Just think. I'm sure that you could think of at least 2 actions that you took in the past few weeks that could be considered self-handicapping. However, you most likely had no conscious intention of doing so. We humans are an innately social species, and our self-image and public image takes precedent to most things in our lives as a whole. That being said, it is no wonder why people often take actions, even though they could be opposite of what you think you want, in order to preserve our social standing and our self-image. So, I urge you all to try and pay attention to your tendency to self-handicap and recognize the subconscious workings of your mind.